Well, hello there, beloved friends, and welcome to this first video in this series I'm called Fierce Feminine Rising, A Dawn to the Golden Age. So today we have our very first speaker. This is Yvonne Yjemani Li from Hong Kong, who is going to speak to us about the situation that we can see erupting deeply all over our news channels, but also, more importantly, the inner alchemy, the inner templates that are coming through this crisis and that the people of Hong Kong and China have agreed to live out. Before we go over to Yvonne, I would like to put a deep wave of gratitude out to Akasha, who actually brought Yvonne to my attention. Akasha was with us this summer in our house in the south of France, partaking in some sacred body awakening facilitator training. And she brought to my attention this situation in Hong Kong, which was also around about the time of the fires in the Amazon. And so a whole load of us women were we were seeking out the news and the latest updates on these two events. And of course, we're doing a training to awaken the deep feminine mystery within our bodies. And after about day 2 or day 3, we simply couldn't progress anymore without including these two world situations. And so I just want to thank Akasha for developing the sacred body to take on land mass and the feelings of the land and the people upon that land. So I am now going to take a little humble step back and hand over to Yvonne, who is going to bring us deeply up to date with what is happening over there and perhaps why, and glimpsing the golden age of what could happen should we follow the right path. So over to Yvonne.
Thank you, Anaiya, for having me and for doing all of this body awakening landmass work with Akasha during the summer. Because, as you know, I feel that this issue, the conflict and the violence that has erupted in Hong Kong, is not only affecting us in the region, those in Hong Kong and in China, but it is creating a lot of changes within the psyche of our global family. And over the last few months, you can say there have been many events. We will not go into any specific one, but what we want to share is really the higher perspective, the divine plan that is unfolding and is continuing to unfold. And what this really means for each of us, particularly those in Hong Kong who are the more active players, but also what it means for all of the population in Hong Kong, what it means for China, and what it means for other people around the world. And this topic, when you invited me to speak about this topic, immediately the guidance came that it would be around truth, liberty, and divine expression. Now, between the protesters and what you see as the conflict between them and the police was initiated through the establishment of an extradition bill that the government wanted to promote. And as a result, many people came out to the streets peacefully initially, and there were hundreds of thousands, if not millions at the time. And it was probably for the very first time that so many citizens, after having been oppressed, and I don't mean oppressed in the sense where they cannot move from place to place, but I mean oppress socioeconomically. Because what we have experienced in Hong Kong for many years now, decades, is a very strong patriarchal energy. And that patriarchal energy, in terms of the leadership, the governmental leadership or the business leadership or the development of our society in general, has been focused on economic development at all cost. And this has created a lot of inequality in terms of incomes being earned, inequality in terms of job opportunities, inequality in terms of the physical spaces that we live in. Some of the places that Hong Kong, that we call home in Hong Kong, would be regarded as probably not livable in many places, particularly developed places around the world. But yet, in this day and age, 2019, these tiny little flats, or even just the cubicle where some people have to pay a reasonably high rent for, continues to be one of the solutions, when in fact, from a human rights perspective, it should not. And so there are lots and lots of reasons for why there would be civil unrest. It's never the one thing, but a lot of discontent at how the place is run, what services are available, what opportunities are available before the public starts to step out. And that would be what probably majority of you would have seen at the beginning back in June. But the higher plan, or the so-called the divine plan, what is unfolding is that Hong Kong is also taking on the karma on behalf of China, and the world in a way, because what we have is this karma in terms of being able to freely express themselves. Chinese people in general, because they've gone through these civil wars in the past, or these wars with the Japanese and the British in the past, my generation, but particularly, my parents' generation, they really do not wish to cause any trouble. For them, they just want to go around, go about their life, just to have a nice home, be with their family, have food on the table, and that's it. They really don't want to cause trouble. Yeah. They certainly, most of the time, don't want to protest or cause unrest. But when you when you subject yourself to peace, but peace at all costs, then, and you're not stepping into your truth, not stepping into your sovereignty, that's when things become uneven, and we prolong and allow the authorities to continue the way that they have been engaging in for a very long time. And so the stepping up initially in June of those, what they said was 1 million people the first time and 2 million people who walked the streets the second time, was an outpouring that, right, we can no longer allow this to take place, and we really must step forward if we want to create a future for ourselves, but more so for our youngsters. That was the inertia, that was the original spark that pushed everybody out, that gave us those beautiful images on the news of, very peaceful protests. And that's when Hong Kong kind of, in this instance, became sort of international, recognized for, it's amazing for such a large population, such a large group, to actually walk the streets peacefully. I think at some point they were saying we should be giving Hong Kong people a Nobel Prize because they have been so peaceful. But sadly, over the 5 months, as you've now seen, because it is unfolding right now as we speak, it has gone from being very peaceful to what we now seeing as very destructive. And over the months, the violence has escalated, and it's escalated on both sides. The protesters have felt that they are not being heard, and that's on the part of our government leadership in not really not knowing how to engage the public sentiment, not knowing how to be empathetic and compassionate, not being savvy enough to be able to read the ties and provide the remedial measures to appease that public sentiment. And so the police have had to go in to maintain order. At the same time, what we've seen with some of the protesters, but not all of them, some of them have become more and more radicalized. Just yesterday, we had many students, youths, who had been for the last few days holed up in their university, trying to protect their grounds, so to speak. And after days of being at the university, fighting with the police, many of them have since gone home. But I believe there are still some right there right now as we speak. And so what has caused that descent from being just wanting to express our views to being so radicalized is the use of media and news and technology. And so when we talk about truth and divine expression, truth, in a way, is very perception-based. It is based on, if one is not in their heart, right? If one is not connected to their compassion within the heart, then their sense of truth is going to be affected by their understanding of what they're seeing on the news, by articles written by others. It's going to be affected by news, and certainly by the scenes that they see out on the street. And so you can say a lot of people got triggered in these last few months on both sides. Many of the protesters, be it young or older generation, got very, very triggered. And also now, because the protesters, some of them, have been very extreme in damaging public property, in not allowing people to go to work, in damaging cars, so on and so forth, have also now been very, very triggered. And they are triggered with being very emotional, subject to their beliefs of what they see as being the truth. And so the problem behind all of this is their sense of truth is being constantly shaped by unbiased, biased opinion of these news reporters, or these news stations, or these news platform, or the author of the articles that they're reading. It is also being fueled by very specific narratives, because if it's unbiased, you can say, well, the author doesn't recognize they're unbiased. But there are also in cases where the author or the producer of that program is very biased and want to portray a very certain narrative without checking the facts, or without presenting both sides of the views. And on top of that, what we've had is a lot of fake news. And so can you imagine, in this climate, it's all happening at the same time in Hong Kong at a very fast pace, and it's constantly shaping people's views, therefore shaping their opinion, therefore triggering new emotions, and whatever they perceive to be their truth has just gone deeper and deeper. Because as you can imagine, in any conflict, in any violence, people will make mistakes. There is no absolute truth or absolute justice when you are fighting. But it has gotten to that stage where people will say, my violence or the violence of the protesters is more than justified because the police started it first. Or on the other side, they feel that our city is now falling apart and they are indiscriminately creating chaos. We want the police to step up their force. And so on both sides have very strong views. The society have become so polarized that friends are no longer speaking to each other. Some families have their relationships is really not in a good place. You know, there are some protesters, I understand, where they're no longer welcome home. Yeah.
Yes.
And so these views being polarized, being antagonized through all forms of media has revealed what I believe to be the biggest issue probably of our time on the planet. Because in Hong Kong, we have a very high level use of the internet, something like 80-something%, and 80% of them use mobile. And so we have a very high penetration using technology and social media. And so these are one of the ways. Hong Kong is like the perfect showcase. If I wanted to create trouble, through using social media means, Hong Kong is like the model case, because what we have is this very high use of the internet. And certainly part of our society over the years at being more masculine driven rather than, feminine, having the feminine balance, is this very high use of the internet, coupled with the fact that we, live in a major urban city. There's less availability to access nature or be one with ourselves. People are constantly, on the go. Very driven to economically provide, to be constantly aware of the news, so to speak. So they're always on their cell phones, and not to mention, of course, the radiation created from all of this technology. And so the higher lesson for us here in Hong Kong now, as it has been very apparent with not just what I mentioned, the bias information that has been proliferated online, but also the international media attention. Amazon fire, you would have thought, or let's say the fires that are going on right now in Australia, you would have thought people would be, or the news agencies would be really interested to report about it. Hong Kong is, let's say, if Hong Kong receives 100% of the media attention, those news are maybe just receiving 10%. Or vis-a-vis, let's say, the previous student climate change issues, or the Chilean protests that also resulted in lots of deaths. Hong Kong has been receiving unprecedented media coverage. And so the international media with the local media has been, based on their unbiased views, but also agenda, has been portraying different stories. And that's why it has become so obvious now, at least to those of us in Hong Kong, but also many of my friends overseas, they also can see through the illusion, the veil, that the international media and local media is portraying, in not willing to share both sides of the stories, in being very biased, in pushing forward certain agenda with regards to their narrative. And so in Hong Kong, just over these few months now, people are starting to lose their trust in the mainstream media with what they read, they are going to take rather a step back to fact check, is this really the truth? And ideally, at some point, they will learn to come into their heart, to really access the true wisdom, to get a sense of, is this news true? Because amongst all of every day or every other day, there's something going on, and there's so much content being now dumped into the net. One is, are you going to be the one to proliferate the news and continuing to share? Are you going to step back and check? Are you, upon viewing the information, going to exhibit compassionate wisdom? For example, for myself, I choose not to share any violence. And that's a very, to share any of the news, but it's a very mindful way of not perpetuating the violence to enter the psychic field of mass consciousness. Because there's a lot of half-truths, there's a lot of agenda, but also, personally, I am against the violence. And what we have seen over these few months is not just the physical violence between the protesters and the police, or between the protesters and some of the citizens. We have seen a lot of violence in people's speeches, in how they interact with others online. And there have been a lot of violence with, obviously, their thoughts when, as they're coming across the news. And so when we talk about now, because the violence has gotten to that new level, a new peak recently, just this week, and people ask themselves, what can I do? How will this violence end? Well then, to create change in any manner, particularly if you want to affect those around you and your environment, the change must begin with you. And so we really must be very mindful. And this is the collective lesson here. It's not just for Hong Kong people, it's for the whole world. How often have we allowed violence to perpetuate in our lives? And why I say that the lesson is also for the world is because, to be very honest, if this same situation had occurred in the US, the violence probably would have been a lot worse. From the part of the police retaliation.
Yes.
But in Hong Kong, they are more subdued. It's still not okay with all that they have done, because it's really affected a lot of citizens going about, and many people have been hurt through the tear gas and been traumatized, so on and so forth. But the violence, if we cannot accept this level of violence now in Hong Kong as a global community, how can you accept your country going to war in a foreign country? Yeah. And if we're saying, those of us in Hong Kong, if we're saying we cannot accept the level of violence now, then are you willing to also look at how you might have perpetuated violence through your words, through being unkind to another, through the movies and the music you watch and listen to or share with your friends and family? This is the time the situation calls upon us to really reflect on that, to say, it is enough. We're calling for a ceasefire to the violence between the two sides. We are going to take responsibility for all the violence we've all, ever perpetuated. But of course, not everyone is there, and that's okay. And this is why this is that part of the karma that is playing out. The karma that Hong Kong is playing out on behalf of China and the world around violence. It is playing out the karma on behalf of China and Chinese people about their freedom of expression. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they are playing out that lesson of how freedom, it's okay to ask for freedom. It is important for all of us to be free. But freedom, just as love and truth, is also really based on your perception. And so your level of freedom to my level of freedom is going to be different. And therefore, we also have to honor each other's, what they're seeking for, their truth in seeking for freedom as being the highest at that point in time. But also freedom, there's no real freedom unless you are free from your heart. And so if you're just striving for freedom from this place of fear, from hate, from control, then that's not freedom. Because that means that you're not being responsible, because freedom must be balanced with responsibility. It needs to be freeing for other people. And so what we have, that freedom of expression, has been flipping from one side to the other. People are stepping up in a way they've never stepped up before. It is encouraging, it is forcing those who have traditionally been quiet to also start to assess their values. And because there is a bit of that mob mentality now, many who have been trying to express their concerns or to be presenting another way have been shut down. And so then it completely flips to this side, to not allow you to express. And so in that struggle between this side or that side, people are learning to step into their truth, to a level of truth that they have not previously been comfortable with, and to honor that truth at the physical level, mental level, and emotional level. And ideally, as they continue to use this opportunity, the conflict that is, and if they get triggered, to do the inner work.
Yes.
They can clear so much of their own karma, the karma from their ancestral line, previously held beliefs, subconscious beliefs as well, to clear it from your whole being. And out of that, they can become so much more compassionate, have a deeper sense of peace internally because they've reached that balance within themselves, to step into their truth that is not going to be swayed by media or other people, to really become a pillar of light. And so while some people certainly have dropped in their consciousness, some have even dropped in their level of consciousness to the extent where they feel like they're just stuck in a prison, and that's why they're really fighting. They're getting very emotional.
Yes.
There are many beautiful, loving light workers have also been stepping up their light. And so that the shadow and the light has, while this has been rising as well in a way, the light has also been rising. There's been more of an outpouring of love. There's been more light being, people holding on to the light and being a beacon of light for others. And so, for those of us here in Hong Kong who are awakened, but also, our friends from afar, I would urge everyone to not just look at Hong Kong as an event that does not affect us. It is just a microcosm of that which is occurring for all of us across the planet, which is around what is your level of truth? How much are you going to be affected by media or other people's comments? Have you explored all of your own beliefs, subconscious ones? Are you being triggered emotionally? Which of your aspects, the masculine or the feminine, is needing attention to, needing to come back into your core with love? Can you become even more open and say, well, you know, I have made mistakes in the past. Everyone has made mistakes in the past. I can forgive myself. And not asking you to immediately change and forgive the opposition, but to give yourself the space to let go of those strong beliefs, to really come back into oneness and love with all that you are. And then from there, of course, is when you are able to liberate more of yourself from the heart, to let go of all that no longer serves you, is to then, from then on, really be able to operate from a space of divine expression. And that is really only speaking from your heart, not speaking from a place of ego, but also when somebody is presenting a view that is not what you would normally expect, is to really step back and go, okay, I'm trying to listen with my heart. And can I accept that that's that person's truth at this point in time? And if we can do that, then we can all move forward into what I call co-creation. Because especially with what we're experiencing now, this destructive energy, they call it the Moldavite energy. Everything is being cleaned out, so to speak. Everything that you previously knew of, your relationships, the environment, the political system, the news, it's being crumbled in front of our very eyes. And it's asking you to do the internal contemplation and reestablish what are the core values that resonates with you the most. How can you elevate to a higher form of being and expression and creation? And from there, if you can recognize that is going to be the case for everyone else, and that ultimately you can also recognize that behind whatever that expression is, that there is love. Just that, you know, what we perceive to be love is going to be different from everyone. But then if everybody has and is acting from a very strong place of love, whether they are pro-democracy or pro-government, so to speak, then we can say, well, love is the uniting factor. Love is the uniting factor that is going to move us all forward to rebuild the community that we want. No longer just, you know, giving our power away to the powers to be, to the government or to the business leaders to determine what we want, but it's to make sure we have our say. Is to make sure we're part of the design. It's to take ownership for what we want to see as being our future. But that co-creation requires us to be accepting of other people's views. Of, you know, sometimes not having to have it all. You know, to compromise, to collaborate. And what is interesting about Hong Kong, it turns out that it is a consciousness co-creation source portal. And which means that whatever gets co-created here will reverberate and magnify across the planet. It is this co-creation portal because we have this history. Because since 22 years ago, and we have now become a part of China, we have what you call a one country, two system. One country, but two political system. And obviously from a cultural standpoint, we're a very international city. We have our British background. We also have our Chinese background, on top of which our city has just naturally attracted a lot of people from around the world. They used to say that whatever takes place here in Hong Kong can really magnify and spread across the world. And, you know, with the two legal systems, the one country, two system, but also culturally and all the diversity in our population, that co-creation has come at a time when, in a way, it would seem as though there is no way of moving forward. But no, there are many in the community who are very much aware of that bigger picture and who are coming together. And this includes Akasha, myself, and 70 other beautiful souls. In this instance, we're going to come together and co-create a festival called Belove Festival, the one I mentioned to you about before. And that is a really beautiful collaborative energy where we've put aside what we normally do and allow the divine to guide us in what will become then the highest for the community. And if we embody that collaborative energy, and this is, you know, the preface to that, the disclaimer to that is we all have different political views, but the love is the uniting factor. The love for our city is the uniting factor. And then when we anchor this into Hong Kong, this beautiful energy, we are then able to then assist the wider community to move forward and work together despite having different views. And so it's still very much in the works right now, but we certainly welcome all beautiful, positive intentions to assist, because just as much as it is a co-creation between those of us in Hong Kong, it's also a co-creation from us with others around the world who have that intention of, and the belief that we are really just one at the end of the day. That we are, you know, we all have our differences. We're all unique beings of light. We all have our unique soul journeys. But at the end of the day, no matter the separation, we can still be just one community, because that's the only way we can move forward. And so I'm just going to kind of stop there and see if you have any more questions or anything you want to touch on from that.
I just want to thank you so much for sharing with so much clarity and so much feeling. And when you spoke about the Belove Festival towards the end, I actually felt this emotion well up inside of me, because I have a real feeling that it's going to be the women of Hong Kong and China who are going to bring something more to the protest, to what we're already seeing on the news. So it's kind of like that feminine essence is going to come with a second contribution, which sounds exactly like what you're already planning. And I just want to really say to the Hong Kong people and to the Chinese people, to everyone involved in this situation, I and many of us are listening. We are watching, and we are most definitely feeling. We, as us in the spiritual community or the mystical community, we know that this is a reflection of something really important that is happening worldwide. We also look on at the people of Hong Kong protesting and being so active on the streets in their, you know, in their expression of no, that there is a pride there. There is we're proud of what is happening. Of course, the violence is something we're all deeply concerned about. But we are noticing that you are activating quicker than us in Europe. We have these little protests every now and again, but we're all still so afraid. And so when we see you take to the streets, and when we see all areas of life coming forward and reclaiming their voice, there is a sense of they are doing this. They are leading the way. It's like migrating birds. You guys are at the front.
Yeah, our youth are the ones that they are on a mission to wake up the collective.
Yes.
And so they are really high vibrational beings. Of course, you know, part of the violence is they're clearing their own karma, right?
Yes.
However, they are the ones that are very persistent about change, because for them and many other around the world, they want change now. They no longer will allow the patriarchal system to continue the way it has been. And so they are part of that wave of souls who are trying to bring back the divine feminine principles of balancing all that has been created in the past, rightly or wrongly. And, they are taking on a lot, because they've taken on enormous pressure. Many of them, are in a very tough place, on top of which, they're being, in some cases, also influenced by the technology that I mentioned before.
Yes.
And, outside influences. But nevertheless, we, no matter what side they are on, whether they're the youngsters, whether they are older generation, or they're the police, we actually need to be empathetic to everyone.
Yes.
We're not here to scold them.
No.
We're not here to judge them.
Yeah.
If you're a spiritual person, you should know that there is a higher purpose to all of this.
Yes.
And we just have to hold them in this container of love.
Absolutely.
And also have to step into our sovereignty.
Yeah.
So we also have to say no to violence, or no to whatever it is that pulses you, and no longer live in that fear. Because there is the collective plan that will take place, right? It's going to go like this, but we also have our free will. And if we say no, we collectively, we don't want this, it can be done in another way. Well, then it can actually change course.
Yeah.
And so, whether it's the protesters or the pro-government, or somebody sitting at home who is quite apolitical but having very strong feelings against the violence, you can do something about it.
Yes.
You can say no to violence, but it does require you to step over your fear of being seen, your fear of what will other people say, your fear of perhaps even retribution. But then if you couple that with that divine expression, really speaking from your heart, not from a place of anger, then you are then becoming the role model for others. And that's what we're starting to see finally, in a way, after many, many months of people being scared because of the mob mentality. People are now kind of beginning to find their voices. And so, I do ask for divine assistance, that, whatever is meant to unfold will unfold with grace and ease, and with as much love and support as possible.
I would like to thank you personally, Yvonne, for coming out and speaking on behalf of your country, on behalf of your ancestors, on behalf of whatever it is you're carrying. Because before we spoke, I imagined myself in your shoes. And there was fear. Even, as I prepared for this call, I was contemplating, the weight of China, the fact that I too am coming into a new position to have these conversations. So I was already feeling the fringes of that collective fear, creeping up on me in the French Pyrenees. And so, Yvonne, you have stepped forward with such clarity and such steadfastness and such humility and grace. So from one woman to another, from one human to another, I want to really recognize that in you. And you spoke out, despite perhaps, a sense of fear that you shouldn't or you mustn't, but you did. And that is what touches me the most. And I wish you so many blessings. And I am going to light a candle on behalf of you and the message you shared with us today. and that I'm with you in heart, I'm with you in feeling. And I wish the golden age upon you. And that is what I'm going to hold deeply in my heart until we see, the fruition of this crisis, this conflict, and to see what it leads to. Because the world is watching, the world is caring. We can see the propaganda being played out in the media. We're becoming aware of the fake news and feeling, does this feel true or not? Thank you so very much for speaking with us.
So much to you and to everyone who've been so supportive, for keeping Hong Kong in your prayers, for sending your loving energy. And even if it's only just to the protesters, we thank you for that as well, because they've needed that collective support very much in this time of need.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm anything out of the ordinary, but just, one ordinary citizen, and there are many others who feel that this is a place and these are the people that we love. And, personally, I've also had to work through whatever has triggered me in the past, and it has not always been smooth, so to speak, not in the way that was shared today. And so, but that's okay. And, I do want to once again thank you so much for the opportunity to share this story, and for everyone's loving concern for Hong Kong. But personally, I have very strong faith that, like you said, the golden age is upon us.
Yes.
New Lemuria is being established through Hong Kong. The divine feminine principles will come into sacred union with the masculine at some point. And so, let's just, keep going and supporting one another in this big, beautiful community that we are.
Thank you, Yvonne. And as they say here in the French Pyrenees, may peace be with you.
And peace be with you too.
See you.
Thank you so much.